Hey guys, hope you're well. My name is Elsie and I am one of the co-founders of Our Social Therapy. It's a platform that was started in 2019 and restarted in 2020 with the aim of creating a culture around conversation with regards to topics such as sexual assault, abuse and trauma. Um, we are hoping to have more conversations around healing, education, well-being, because these are very heavy topics. And I know that it's important to have a balance when approaching these conversations with both the hard facts and the soft healing as well. But yeah, so this month, April, is Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and I wanted to run a series of presentations, lives, content, etc., to hopefully expand this conversation a bit more, provide more education and insight into the various nuances of this topic, and just hopefully enlighten at least one person with, just a deeper insight into the conversation. And so in today's presentation, we're going to be talking about what is sexual assault, who does it affect, and what is the impact. Let me just turn the page. I'm going to turn the page, okay. Contents, so we're going to be looking at the stats, the types of sexual assault, what is consent, and some signposting at the end. So the stats. So these stats were taken from a recent article by The Guardian. Initially, The Guardian stated that 97% of young women had experienced sexual assault. However, it's been later amended with the up-to-date stats saying that 4 out of 5 young women aged 18 to 24 have experienced being sexually harassed. This is obviously a massive number, and it just goes to show how big this issue is. The United Nations are calling it a human rights issue, and something that definitely needs to be addressed, not only in the UK, but on a worldwide global scale, as well as in our little communities and pockets of society. 96% of young women aged 18 to 24 didn't report their experiences. I think the highest reasons for doing so were embarrassment, shame, fear. And as you can see here, 45% didn't report anything because they didn't see a point in reporting anything. This is again really sad to hear. However, being a survivor myself, I definitely do testify to that feeling that there is no point, because often nothing really happens, nothing really changes. If you know that 10%, the 10% of victims that do report their crimes to the police, I think around only 2% actually result in convictions. So you can see that there definitely is more that needs to be done in terms of creating a culture of accountability and safety, so that young and old victims and survivors of abuse feel like there is a point in reporting and feel like change is possible, you know? Yeah. However, I think with this issue, it's also important to highlight the hidden stats. As many people that do report their experiences, there are probably 10 more that don't report their experiences. And so are the stats actually correct? If 96% of young women don't report their incidents, how many more are we missing? And what can we do to alleviate that so that we are finding out more about other people's experiences? Secondly, stats don't collect, or official UK like government stats don't collect information from under 16s, even though in 2019 there were 73,000 reports of child victims. Again, we're missing out on a huge population of really vulnerable children who are not being included in government action to address this issue, or not being included in the wider conversation, which is really important. You know, we often look at above 16 as being the age of consent, and then the place for these conversations to take place. But from my own experience, I think my first experience of sexual abuse happened when I was in primary school, early primary school, maybe 5 or 6 years old. Back in my time, the court system was horrible. And, you know, there's just so much that could have been done in terms of intervention, in terms of sex ed at school. We had sex ed, but do you know what I mean? Like making it more holistic, making it more inclusive of these kind of topics so that young women, young children, young people know how to address these issues from a young age, because by excluding them, we're excluding the possibility of it affecting them, when really we know that it does affect young children. Thirdly, there's even less information on the prevalence of male sexual assault survivors, many of whom don't even realize they've been abused. I've had so many conversations with my male friends who have spoken about experiencing sexual abuse at young ages. However, due to social and cultural reasons, they either one, don't see it as a big thing. They're just like, oh yeah, it happened and it probably affected me, but okay. Which isn't something that I think we should be advocating for as a society. And two, because they're men, a lot of the adult survivors or adult people who have experienced some form of sexual harassment or abuse, they don't see it as anything because they're men and they're meant to always be available for sexual activity. You know, there is no real promotion of males' autonomy and advocacy over their own bodies when it comes to sexuality. A lot of them are expected to want to engage in sex, and therefore a lot of men won't report or stand up for themselves when it comes to being sexually harassed. In the same way that, you know, the support is available for women. And finally, there's even less research and support for trans and non-binary people, including the LGBTQI community, who are at greater risk of feelings of shame, exclusion, isolation, which all make it which all put them at greater risk of both experiencing sexual assault and abuse, but also make it much harder for them to access services and adequately recover from their experiences, you know. So I think there's so much work that we have to do in terms of making the stats and the research around sexual abuse a lot more inclusive, and a lot more participatory in terms of the different types of communities. And again, I think there's also so much more to be done on looking at how culture, race, again, gender, age, how all these different elements impact sexual assault and who it affects. Next slide. So there are many types of sexual assault abuse. I think as society is becoming a lot more aware and conscious, we are realizing that a lot of the things that were okay in the past are no longer okay. For example, it was only in 2015 that it became illegal for teachers and social workers and other people in positions of trust to, it became illegal for them to have sex with like their students or those under their care, which is absolutely crazy to me. And more recently, 2021, this year, it became illegal for people like faith leaders, sports leaders to engage sexual activity with young people in their care. Even though there's like a long history of like the Catholic Church doing madness, etc., etc. But yeah, I think even with like the way that the world is changing in terms of like greater access to digital landscapes, I think there's going to be a lot more research needs to be done in terms of the ways that we understand and approach sexual assault prevention. However, before speaking about the different types of sexual assault, I thought it'd be good to look at what is consent. And so consent is when someone holistically and freely agrees to do something or agrees to something. I really want to stress for anyone watching this that consent is only consent is yours to give, and you have every single right to say no to things that you aren't sure of or that make you feel uncomfortable, you know, like that, like no more, I didn't want to do it, but okay, like no more of that. If you don't like something, we're saying no, and we're saying no with a full stop at the end, period. No explaining. It is what it is. Okay. So yeah, some just important things to note, that consent is fluid and it can be taken back at any time. You know, you can consent to maybe a little bit of kissing, but it doesn't mean that nobody has to put their hands on your body, you know. Kiss me without your hands. So I'm saying, you know, every single act in sexual activity needs to be consented to, and you have every right to decline and stop the process at any single stage. So even if your clothes are off, it doesn't mean that you now have to have sex if you're not comfortable, you know. You can stop and revoke and take back consent at any time. Verbal consent after excess manipulation and coercion and threats is not consent. So again, I've had many experiences where I've had to say no to a guy like 12 times before he hears me that I'm saying no. That is no longer acceptable. It's never been acceptable. Someone saying to you, well, come on, babes, come on, like just one, just the head, just the tip, just this, just that. Come on, you did it last time, or none of that. All of that is removing someone's ability to freely give consent. People under the influence of alcohol, drugs cannot give consent. Let me move my head. Participants must be fully and truthfully informed on the extent of all important relevant information. For example, if someone asks you about your STI or STD status and you lie to them, that person's ability to give consent has been impaired. If someone asks you if you're having sex with other people and you lie about it, you're impairing their ability to give consent. If someone asks you, do you have a girlfriend or a boyfriend, and you lie about it, you're impairing that person's ability to give consent, and it is no longer consent because they're not informed. So I think there aren't many conversations that address consent in this way in terms of it being informed, but I think that's a very important part of consent. It must be informed. If you lie to someone about any part of an activity, that person is basically not giving consent. So just something to be aware of. And consent can only be given by someone with the intellectual, emotional, and mental capacity to do so. We already know that anyone under the age of 16 cannot give consent. However, I argue that 16 to 18-year-olds cannot give consent to adults, simply because 16 to 18-year-olds are still at a very developmental stage in their emotional and cognitive development. Therefore, I personally think they cannot give consent to adults. However, that's a personal thing. People that are in emotional distress, you know, we hear a lot of stories of people going around to their friend's house in complete emotional distress, and them then being taken advantage of at their lowest or weakest state. And again, people that are suffering from maybe a crisis, a mental health crisis, these people cannot give consent because they're not at their optimum intellectual, emotional, or mental capacity. I hope that provides a deeper insight anyway into what we think of as consent, and I'd be more interested to hear anyone else's additions to this. So yeah, types of sexual assault. So obviously we hear a lot about rape/assault, and that is when someone uses force or coercion to gain non-consensual activity. Again, as we heard before in the discussion about consent, we often think about rape as being this kind of like violent process, whereas coercion and manipulation are additional forms of force, mental force, emotional force, and therefore will constitute as rape. Harassment, someone who persists in forcing non-consensual interaction. If I say that, so please stop. I'm not engaging with you in a consensual way. Please stop. Okay? That is harassment. Catcalling, interacting with someone purely through a sexualized lens, you know, like walking on the street and being like, hey, what that ass do, mom? What, what's in them jeans? You know, interacting with someone and reducing them purely to an objectified sexual lens is catcalling. Usually it's done publicly, as in like we're talking about like it being done on the streets. However, I would argue that anyone who, even if someone whispers in your ear, it's still catcalling, you know, God forbid anyone should whisper in my ear, but it's still catcalling, you know, interacting with someone through a purely sexualized and objectified lens. Intimate partner abuse. Studies show that most of the people who perpetuate any form of sexual assault and abuse are actually known to the victims already. And so when we speak about intimate partner abuse, a lot of people think that once you get into a relationship, your autonomy over your body is kind of diminished, whereas that isn't true. Even whilst you're in a relationship, you still have complete autonomy and authority over your body and over your choices. So intimate partner abuse is when your intimate partner or relationship partner uses force, threats, or coercion to make you engage in sexual activity. For example, like, not tonight, babe, I'm tired, you know? And then someone and your partner's like, but you didn't do it last night either. What? Like, stop. This is abuse, okay? Okay? And you don't owe anyone access to your body, period. Never. Do you know what I mean? It's always has to be consensual, always has to be freely given, always has to be your choice. Grooming, the slow, methodic building of a relationship with someone through trust, dependency, and then eventually isolating them with the intent of eventually exploiting them for personal gain. We're going to do a separate presentation on grooming itself because it is a massive topic. However, yeah, it's essentially that building a relationship with someone that seems like it's trusting through maybe friendship, speaking to their family, and then eventually isolating them from their social system so that they depend on you, they trust you, they listen to your word, and they do anything that you want them to do, which is basically to exploit them. With grooming, what happens is that someone is groomed to eventually give consent, and it's a reason why a lot of people who have been groomed don't speak out about their abuse, because they feel like they gave consent, they feel like they participated freely in the events that took place. However, and when you look at the trajectory of their experiences, there's at least 2 to 3 months or even weeks of coercion, threats, manipulation that have all taken place before certain events happened, you know? And so again, impairing someone's ability to give consent through prolonged manipulation and coercion. Abuse under the influence. Sexual activity with someone who's under the influence of alcohol, drugs, etc., to the point of impaired ability to give consent. I think it's kind of clear if someone is drunk or pulling a whitey, or you know, like off their head, that they can't give consent, and to engage in any sort of sexual activity at that point is abuse. Trafficking, buying, selling, or showcasing access to a person's body, e.g., slavery, forced prostitution, and the illegal organ market. I think trafficking is such a massive hidden type of sexual assault, and it often involves highly organized individuals, organizations, groups of people who usually have access to a great amount of capital and power to go undetected. You know, it's crazy when you think of like the BBC sex rings and what's this man's name, Epstein, just mass amounts of access to capital and power that allows for trafficking to take place. Yeah, indecent exposure of sexual organs for voyeurism. I think when we talk about exposure, indecent exposure, it's something that I'm fairly new to in terms of like sexual abuse or sexual assault. But I do understand that if someone is out on the street with their body out, with their breasts out, or their bum out, or their penis out, or whatever other sexual organs out, with the intent of being sexually voyeuristic, I can understand that as being sexual assault and abuse, because you're non-consensually forcing people to engage with you and you as a sexual person. However, I don't believe that breastfeeding counts as indecent exposure because the intent is different. Breastfeeding gives life. It's for your baby. It's for a baby to feed and to grow. However, I know there are a lot of debates around this. I personally don't think breastfeeding counts as indecent exposure, but that's me personally. Documenting footage, sexual footage without consent, filming, recording, voice recording, storing, streaming, taking photos, and sharing sexual content of a person without their up-to-date consent. I stress up-to-date consent because someone may have consented to filming a sexual activity a few weeks ago, or a few months ago, a few years ago. However, once that relationship ends, I think it's important that all footage is deleted. I don't think anyone should store footage of anyone engaging in sexual activity, and should certainly not be sharing that activity with anyone else. I didn't actually know that watching someone else engage in sexual activity was without their consent was actually sexual assault. I think obviously I understand it in terms of watching them in the flesh, in the live. So like maybe like peering behind a door, or like watching through someone's windows. You know, I didn't actually know that it was a form of sexual assault, but I definitely understand it. You're trespassing on someone's intimate personal time without their consent. And even when we think about like revenge porn and stuff like that, even watching revenge porn, or even watching these videos that are often like shared across social media and stuff like that, by watching them, we are actually engaging in sexual assault. And I think I really do understand that, in the sense that it must be horrible to go viral, to have your sexual activity go viral, and for people to be watching it, commenting it, having all the views, you know, that must be such a horrible process to go through. And so in that respect, I definitely understand it as being sexual assault. Stealthing, covertly removing or damaging a condom during or before intercourse. I think that's, again, a very new thing that we've become more aware of in society as a form of sexual assault. And I think on the flip side, another element of stealthing is what we saw in Bridgerton, with the woman refusing to stop, or refusing to like get off the guy as he was about to bust. Sorry, I don't have like official terms for like to speak about these things, but basically she was on top and he was about to bust, and he was telling her to get off, but she didn't, and so she made him bust inside her. Does that makes sense? Like, for me, I would see that as a form of stealthing as well. But that's just me personally. And maybe there's a different word for it. Maybe there is a different word for it. Again, like, I'm so open to learning more about this topic. And so for anyone that does have more insight, please feel free to shoot me DM or comment on the comment below. Finally, slut shaming and kink shaming, shaming or bullying someone for their sexual preferences or sexual history. I think this is very damaging for people. And we see a lot in secondary schools, you know, being shamed for doing certain things, or being told that you're not a good person, or being told that you're weird. All of these can have really damaging effects on a person's mental health and psyche, and is a form of sexual assault. And so here are just some words, some additional words that I think surround this topic: manipulation, threats, misogyny, subjugation, bullying, objectification, patriarchy, grooming. I don't know if you have any more words that you'd add to this. Again, please let me know in the comments. So looking at the mental and emotional impact on sexual assault victims. So denial and self-doubt, guilt and shame, low self-esteem, self-medication through either alcohol or drugs, PTSD, emotional numbness, flashbacks, impaired memory, isolation, hypervigilance, difficulty concentrating, suicidal thoughts, trust and intimacy issues, anxiety and depression. Just to emphasize how impactful sexual assault is. As I've said, I am a survivor, and I have experienced every single one of these effects being a survivor. It's not a joke, it's not an exaggeration. Sexual assault can really damage and destroy a person's life. I don't think we take it seriously enough or understand the ramifications enough. It is deeply, deeply impactful. And then again, the economic and social impact on sexual assault victims. Difficulty engaging in social, romantic and platonic relationships due to hypervigilance, fear and distrust. Lack of engagement at school or work due to impaired concentration, intrusive thoughts, etc., whilst also navigating the mental and emotional trauma. And physical impacts such as personal injuries, contracting STIs or STDs, and concerns over pregnancy, etc. Again, please let me know if I've missed anything. I can't even begin to imagine all the different ways that people are affected. And I think there are so many ways that people are affected. We just need more people to speak up so that we can understand the issue more. So where to get help. So this is just a very small list of where to get help. The Survivors Trust, NSPCC if you're under the age of 18, Childline if you're under the age of 18, and the Male Survivors Partnership. Where to get involved. We are accepting all forms of content to contribute to this conversation over this next month and in the future, including article submissions, presentations, artwork, and anyone who wants to be a speaker or panelist on this topic, please get in contact. Contact details are below. Our website is oursocialtherapy.com and my email is ourpeoples.therapy@gmail.com. Hopefully this has been informative. I really want to wish everyone a lovely April, a lovely month, a lovely week. But yeah, hopefully this is just a small insight into the topic of sexual assault, and hopefully it provides more education and more awareness on the topic. We will be having more content over this month and again more in the future. So please stay tuned and let me know if there's anything that you want to talk about specifically. And just a disclaimer, there's a lot that I'm still learning about this topic. And so I will continue to update these as much as possible so that I'm being as inclusive as possible. But yeah, thank you and have a good day. Bye.